Have you seen those stupid little TikTok trends that have been going around lately? You know, the ones where on a person's 18th birthday they can choose between two different abilities. And the choices are some stupid stuff, like being able to see how much money a person has in their bank account, or being able to see if someone is your soulmate or not. Well, guess what? I'm the poor sap that has to live with one of those abilities in real life. I can see how old a person is by the shiny white numbers that float above their head. It's not glamorous or cool. Okay, I take that back. I'm a blast when I go to the country fair and hit up the guess my age stall. I'm being sarcastic if you couldn't tell. My ability is pretty much useless and downright annoying sometimes. I mean, how's a guy supposed to save the world just by knowing how old somebody is? What I'm getting at is this. Being able to see people's ages is more of a nuisance than a superpower. The numbers are pretty blinding and my attention always gravitates to right above a person's head, even if I'm trying not to. Now imagine how that looks to the pretty girl you're talking to, and all they can see is you just staring slightly behind them. I've gotten one too many slaps in the face for doing that. I wasn't always a freak though. There was a period in my life when I was a normal kid with a regular childhood. The seeing people's ages thing happened after the near-death experience I had when I was 10 years old. Thankfully, nothing too traumatic happened. I just got stung by a bee and almost drowned in a pool. It was the end of summer and my parents were hosting their annual back-to-school barbecue. Everyone had gone inside to escape the sweltering summer heat and eat some good food. As good as my salt is spicy white parents could whip up, that is. I stayed outside to play by myself a bit since I was the only kid there. It was always my parents' friends and a few extended family members who went to those parties, none of my friends. The party was mostly for my parents who were just celebrating having made it through another summer with me. It's not like I was a bad kid or anything though. Or maybe I was, and I'm just remembering things differently. Otherwise, maybe I wouldn't have almost died. I was 10, so my parents didn't worry too much about me playing out in the backyard by myself. After all, at that age, I was supposed to be a big boy. Anyway, I was out by the pool playing with some random toy when a bee suddenly landed on my hand. The thing you should know about me is that I'm deathly allergic to bees, like carrying around an EpiPen in my pocket at all times, allergic to bees. I froze when I saw it, too scared to do anything. The bee must have been in a bad mood that day because it decided I was a great threat and stung me, even though I hadn't done anything to it. I swatted the thing off my hand as a hot, searing pain started to radiate through my skin. I stood up after, freaking the hell out as I could see my skin puff up and the sensation of my throat slowly starting to close. In my panic, I hadn't been paying too much attention to my surroundings. One misstep later and I plummeted into the deep end of our in-ground pool. At least the water was refreshing enough to cool the heat flooding through my veins for a quick second. In that quick second, I remembered the existence of my EpiPen. I frantically grabbed for the life-saving medication in my pocket, feeling what little air supply I had left in my lungs quickly leave me. My heart sank as I realized my EpiPen wasn't in my pocket anymore. My vision was starting to blur and had become dotted with a bunch of little stars around the edges. I desperately searched around me in the water as I continued to sink deeper. Finally, my eyes landed on the white, blue, and orange pen. Resisting the immense urge to breathe in, I reached out for the EpiPen. The first swipe and it was just at the tip of my fingers. The motion, however, made the pen sink farther away from me. Some bubbles came out of my mouth in a grunt of frustration. That wasn't good, seeing as that breath out was about 50% of the oxygen I had left. With all my might, which wasn't much since I was so oxygen deprived, I managed to swim down and grab the pen. By that point, my vision was almost completely black and my lips tingled something fierce. Blue to the sky, orange to the thigh, I thought to myself as I uncapped the thing and stabbed myself in the leg, praying the medicine would work underwater. After all that fight, it left me and everything went black and numb. Obviously I didn't die though, because otherwise I wouldn't be here today talking this out with you to listen to. I awoke in the hospital about 2 months later where the doctors informed me I was less than a minute away from dying when I was rescued. Thank God my mom had a gut feeling and went outside to check on me. To this day, she tells me, "It was just a little too quiet in the house and I had a bad feeling," she said. My mom found my EpiPen floating on the surface of the pool and my body at the bottom. She jumped in and managed to get me back to the surface where I coughed up most of the water. I swallowed, but stayed unconscious. Turns out my brain lost enough oxygen to go into hibernation mode or something, causing my body to enter into a comatose state. It took 2 months for my brain to get its shit together enough for me to handle consciousness again. You'd think the worst part about coming back from a coma would be all the therapy that came after it. The physical therapy to learn how to walk again and regain control over my limbs, the speech therapy to learn how to talk again, and the actual therapy where I had to express all my feelings towards what happened to me. Yeah, all that bullshit sucked ass, don't get me wrong. To me though, the worst part was everybody asking me what it was like to be in a coma. I'd constantly been berated by the nurses, doctors, and even my parents about what I remembered during my extended slumber, which by the way wasn't much. It was mostly black nothingness. The only thing I vaguely remember was a dream. There was a garden, big and ethereal, like every plant conceivable to man was planted there and then some. Plants that had never been seen before to the human eye. It could only be described as beautiful. There was also a woman there who was sweet and motherly-like. Her hair was blonde and looked as if her hair had been spun by an orb weaver spider. She wore a long white silk dress and her essence reminded me of a goddess. The most interesting thing about her were her eyes. It's like they changed color every second, never staying one specific hue. I think we had a conversation, but this all happened so long ago I can't tell you what was said. The dream ended with her kissing my forehead. After that, I woke up. After coming out of the coma, I knew something was different about me. For one, there were these glistening white numbers that were plastered above everybody else's head. It was also like a new purpose that had been given to my life. All these years later, I couldn't tell you what it is. Even that feeling of purpose has seemed to dim. Having no possible clue what the numbers could mean, I did the reasonable thing any kid would do. Ask the nearest adult. "Hey Dad, what does the number 47 mean?" I said. I wrote it on the notepad the hospital staff had given me to write with since I wasn't able to use my vocal cords correctly yet. My father scrunched his eyes in confusion. "What are you going on about, Henry?" I scribbled some more. "The number above your head, the 47, what does it mean?" "Are you sure you're feeling all right?" he asked, eyeing me up and down suspiciously like I had just committed a very serious crime. I nodded my head. I felt fine. I just wanted to know what the damn number stood for. Instead of answering my question, he left the room to track down the nearest doctor. The rest of that afternoon was spent getting a whole bunch of brain scans done, all of which came back to normal. I had no growths, no tumors, no brain bleeds, or anything else that would explain why I was seeing numbers above everybody else's head. That night I sat in my hospital bed feeling dejected. Nobody could explain to me why I was seeing things nobody else saw. My mother was beside me, rubbing my hand trying to comfort me. The number 45 glistened above her head. Drowning in self-pity and tired from being poked and prodded all day, I fell asleep. That night I dreamt about the lady in the garden again. She held me in a tight, warm embrace and then whispering something in my ear. When I woke up the next morning, I felt better, enlightened. "Mom, how old are you?" I scribbled on the closest napkin after she brought me breakfast. "That's an interesting question, dear," she told me. "It's a rude question to ask a lady, but I'm 45, she said. It was then that I knew I could see people's ages. After another month in the hospital, I was finally released and able to go home. What is the first thing you'd think I did after coming home from the hospital? I told all my friends of my new ability, of course. This, my friends, is when my ability started to ruin my life. Nobody believed me, even when I tried to prove it. No one even thought it was cool that I could supposedly see how old a person was. My friends dumped me and I became known as the freak who lied about everything and the mental case that just came out of the hospital. The bullying was bad too. Oh God, the bullying. Even my teachers got so annoyed at the insistence of my ability that my parents were called. I got a lecture. The only thing I learned from it was to keep my mouth shut and don't tell anyone that I can see their age. All it would lead to was pain and misery, for me. We eventually moved out of that town and I got to move schools. It was a fresh start for me, to go to a school where nobody thought I was weird or a liar. Of course I didn't dare tell anybody about my ability or my past either. I was never the same after all that, and I stuck to staying in the shadows. Nobody would notice me if they didn't know I was there after all. To this day, I regret my decision to tell anybody about my curse. High school came and went and I graduated. High school was enough for me, so I didn't move up to higher education. Instead, I did the only reasonable thing a person in my situation could do. I became a bartender. The pay was adequate for the long hours I worked, and I got to sleep in on most days, and my boss was chill. His name is Marty, and he owns Marty's, the bar I work at. The place was small and barely up to health code, but I considered it my second home. My first home being the apartment right above the bar that Marty leased to me. My ability made my job a little easier, especially when the state sent in a miner to make sure we were IDing people. I was always at the top of my game. Their spy wouldn't make it to 3 feet from the door before I turned them away. When their fake ID didn't check out either, they sulked right out of the bar. Every time a kid came in with their ironclad fake ID, they got turned around. When they protested that they were of age, I told them that the cops would come down here and verify their age for themselves. They usually got them to stop mouthing off and leave. Now, tonight was like any other night at Marty's. I'd been in the middle of a small rush around midnight. How it usually was that time of night, slinging drink after drink. I was also alone as usual, seeing as I was a seasoned bartender. I didn't really need a bar back or another bartender, even though the extra help would have been nice. And Marty couldn't really afford it either. It was busy enough where I didn't really see her slip in. I had turned around to blend a third frozen margarita for Gladys, one of Marty's regulars. I was stuck in a conversation with her about how good it was to be youthful. Gladys was full of shit. She always went around telling everyone she was only 46, but her true age sat right above her head in big bold numbers, and it said 59. When I turned back, I noticed the woman sitting there at the end of the bar. As it had become second nature to me, I glanced above her head slightly to see her age. But the frozen margarita almost fell out of my hands. The woman had been typing away at her phone, so she didn't notice me fumbling. I quickly handed Gladys her margarita before haphazardly trying to recollect myself. "What can I get for you tonight?" I asked her as confidently as I could muster. I rubbed my eyes, pretending to be a little sleepy. In reality, I rubbed my eyes to make sure I was seeing her age correctly. Above the woman's head in stark white letters was the number 300. At first I thought I misread the number. After all, she looked like she should have been in her early 30s, not early 300s. But alas, the number 300 was firm where it stood. Her hair was long, wavy, in a dark shade of ebony, as if her hair was the night sky itself. She had glistening brown eyes that had this hunger behind them. She also wore a shade of red lipstick that popped out at you. For her pale complexion, the color looked really good on her. Ever since I'd gained my ability, the only ages I've seen were normal ones, only going up to 3 digits. Once when I met a World War I veteran. This woman had to be the oldest person I've ever seen. Against my better judgment, I chalked her numbers up to somehow being a fluke. There was no way someone could actually live to be 300 years old. "I'll have a Bloody Mary," she said, with a toothy smile. Something about her perfect white teeth sent shivers down my spine. It irked me. "Anything else I can get for you?" I asked, remembering that it was rude to stare, though she seemed to revel in the uneasy look in my eyes. "Names are a powerful thing, you know," the woman stated as she rested her chin on the backs of her hands. I could tell she was toying with me. I chuckled as I grabbed a tall, skinny glass and stalk of celery. "Well, my name has no power to it. I'm Henry. It's nice to meet you." I stuck my hand out to her. She smiled and let out a small laugh before taking my hand and shaking it. Harley. Harley? What a fitting name for the woman in front of me. She wore a leather jacket over a plain white t-shirt. If I had to describe her in one word, it would be a biker girl. "I like you, Henry," said Harley, flipping some of her long hair behind her shoulder. The flirtatious action made a knot form in my stomach. "Thank you," I said, forcing myself to smile, handing her drink to her. I took a second to look her over again before starting to tend to the other customers in the bar. I made sure to keep an eye on Harley the whole time, my curiosity getting the better of me. About an hour later, one of the regulars, Jeb, started to hit on Harley. He was 6 beers deep and couldn't tell his ass from a water hose. "Come on, sweets. Come back home with the Jeb. I'll treat you right, sugar. We'll have a fun time," he slurred drunkenly as he wrapped a hand holding a bottle of beer around her shoulder. I could see Harley's features contort into an expression of uncomfortableness. "All right, Jeb," I started, slinging the towel I was using to clean a glass over my shoulder. "I'm cutting you off. Clearly you've had enough to drink tonight." Jeb waved me off, and then he brought his free hand to Harley's boob where he squeezed it gently. A look of shock and fury filled her face. "Jeb," I said testingly, grabbing the beer out of his hand. "Leave him alone, man." The 18-year-old kid who came in with Jeb shouted from the next drunkard. The only reason I let him stay at the bar is because he only ordered a can of Coke. Normally, he never caused trouble when him and Jeb came in anyways. I assumed that Jeb must have been this guy's in to college parties since he was only 22, but with a name like Jeb, I'd expect him to be like 63. Jeb was getting a little more handsy and I could tell Harley was going to snap at any moment. "The both of you need to get out of here now, before I call the cops on you for giving me a fake ID and Jeb for letting you stay in here knowing you were a minor," I said. Like a deer caught in headlights, the kid went, "How did you..." and then his voice trailed off. And then I cut him off. "I don't tolerate harassment of any kind at my bar. Get out now." Jeb's friend grabbed him off of Harley before quickly running out of the bar and into the streets. Harley dusted herself off while staring at the direction the duo ran away in. She then looked back at me and shot me an icy glare. "Thanks, but I could have handled that myself," she said. I shrugged in response and went back to cleaning up around the bar. The rush had ended a while ago and only a few patrons were left. Just a couple, Gladys and Harley. When I turned back to Harley, I noticed she was gone. In her place was a $5 bill and her drink glass. Not one drop had been sipped from the Bloody Mary. I shrugged the ominous feeling that Harley left behind and went back to my closing duties. I kicked a few drunks out of the bar, called them taxis, and then closed Marty's down for the night. The sound of heels crunching against the gravel took my attention off the back door to the bar. A tall shadow stood at the alleyway entrance. I tucked my keys in between my fingers and tightened the grip on the garbage bag in my other hand. "Like I said earlier," a familiar voice echoed off the walls in the alley. "I can handle myself." Harley stepped into the edge of light coming from a street lamp behind her, wiping something off her face with her sleeve. Blood. Her mouth was covered in blood and she had a crazed look in her eye. Her once white shirt, now a rusted brown color. She smiled at me again. This time 2 huge fangs hung in her mouth. The word vampire flooded my mind as her age started to shine more intently above her head. The woman before me was literally 300 years old. A 300-year-old vampire. And she was on me quick, giving me no time to prepare or defend myself. The garbage bag and keys in my hands fell to the ground as I was stuck in her strong grasp. Harley pulled my polo back down and licked the area where my neck and shoulders connected, sending weirdly pleasurable tingles down my spine. I braced myself for the pain that would come from the bite when she eventually stopped licking me. I heard her hiss as a hot stench of iron filled my nostrils. "Don't worry, Henry, I'll make it quick," she said. Harley then clamped her jaw shut as she bit down. I screamed out in pain as I imagined all the blood being sucked from my veins, my body withering away into nothing but a husk and Harley standing over my corpse full and satisfied with my exhaustion. I started crying as my mind flooded in with regrets. How much better could my life have been if I never told anyone about my ability? Maybe my parents wouldn't think I was crazy and a disappointment. Maybe I could have gotten a girlfriend, settled down, got a nice house, and had a family. In my hysteria, I hadn't noticed there had been no pain at all. Harley released me. When realization struck, I spun around in confusion. My neck was fine and not a single blood cell was taken from me. Harley stood behind me chuckling to herself as if she should have known better. In the palm of her hand was a sharp flag. It belonged to her, seeing as a nice gap was in place where her upper left canine once rested, in her gums. "Ah, fuck," she yelled out in an angry laugh, stomping her black leather Doc Martens on the ground. Harley looked me in the eye, a deep-seated hatred in her eyes. "You're a goddamn chosen," she said. I fixed my shirt and pressed myself up against the back door to the bar, still processing the events that just happened. Harley, the 300-year-old vampire standing in front of me, just tried to drain me of my blood. Instead, she ended up breaking one of her fangs off and was currently giving me an "if looks could kill" stare. I'm a what? "Never mind that," I screamed. "You're a vampire." In a second, she was back on me, holding my mouth shut. Harley whispered menacingly in my ear, "Shut the hell up. You know, you might be one of the chosen and I might not be able to drink you, but that doesn't mean I still can't kill you," she said. I pushed her off me, less scared of her than I was a second ago. A breathless laugh escaped my mouth as I ran my hand through my short brown hair. "I still don't know what you're talking about." "Uh-huh, sure you don't," Harley exclaimed, and then rolled her eyes and shoved her hand in my face, fang pointed right at my eyeball. I can't believe I was stupid enough to fall for that nerd's trap. "Where is he, huh? That little twerp, Nate?" she said. "Listen, lady," I said, trying to be menacing, shoving the fang out of my personal space. "You better start talking some sense or I'll knock that other fang right out of your mouth." Harley chuckled. "I'd like to see you try, sweetheart," before stuffing her tooth into the pocket of her leather jacket. She looked unsure of herself, like I might really be able to knock her other tooth out. She took a few steps back and started laughing nervously to herself. Something had her spooked. "Well, this is clearly an act you've got going on here. That, or you really are as clueless as you look. Either way, it's been fun, but I'm getting out of here while I still can," she said. Harley threw out a peace sign as she turned to leave and melted back into the shadows, but suddenly stopped in her tracks. She let out a groan of frustration as she clenched her fists. "No, no, no," she said. I scrunched my eyebrows in confusion. This whole situation was just so odd. Then again, so is a guy who can see how old people are. "Going somewhere, Harley?" An unfamiliar male voice rang out from the entrance of the alleyway. He stepped into the light, holding his hand out in front of him like he was using the Force. "What a shame, the party was just getting started," he said. Well, one thing is for sure, Harley was right. This kid was definitely a nerd. He wore tennis shoes, beige khaki pants, and a dark navy blue sweater vest on top of a white dress shirt. He even had big oversized frame glasses to match. Who I'm presuming to be the infamous Nate, Harley was going on about earlier as tall, dark, and handsome, but I could definitely tell he was just a teenager. What was weird, though, was that for the first time, it wasn't on TV or looking at people through a mirror. I could not see his age. There were no numbers above his head. He just looked like a normal guy. Who I'm still presuming to be Nate said, "Why don't we dance a little?" He then started to flick his wrist around all willy-nilly. As if being a marionette and him the puppet master, Harley then started dancing around foolishly. Clearly she had no control over her own actions. She hissed out angrily, "Oh, when I get my hands on you, you are so dead." In shock and awe, I watched as this cool biker chick ungraciously flailed around by the hands of a nerd. Slowly, he was starting to look less and less like a dweeb as the air of confidence that this kid carried around him made him look almost awesome. All right, that's enough for now. Party's over," Nate said as Harley's movements hitched to a stop. He left her right arm in the air, knees twisted and head down, not unlike a Michael Jackson pose. "I hope you rot in hell," Harley cursed as she gained a little control over her neck muscles and glared at the teen in front of her. She was seething mad. I think I could make out a faint stream of steam coming out of her ears. Nate chuckled as he flicked his wrist one final time. Well, at least you'll be down there, right next to me. A sickening crunch filled the crisp night air as all the bones in Harley's neck snapped as her head did a 180. This was followed by the sound of her limp body falling to the gravel floor. Nate brushed the imaginary dust off his hands as he patted himself on the back, triumphantly. I felt my dinner threatening to come back up as I leaned my body against the wall for support. My vision was spinning. I don't know what I was expecting, but it sure wasn't that. That was just gruesome. Is she dead? I asked as he closed the distance between himself and the corpse on the ground. Harley's eyes were still open and seemed to be piercing my soul. Nate nudged her shoulder, checking for any signs of a reaction. All he got was her body flopping onto its back due to gravity. Nope, he said. As if on cue, Harley's body seemed to liquefy. Nate quickly backed up as if scared to get any of Harley on his pristine shoes. The mass beneath her clothes started to bubble and gurgle as it turned into this black steaming pile of goo. The goo laid claim to the clothes and then started to permeate and seep into the ground. A second later, all evidence of the vampire's existence had all but melted underground. The only thing in its wake was a small black scorch mark. I scrunched my nose in disgust at the scene I was just a witness to. Nate just stood there as if it was an everyday occurrence. "That looks pretty dead to me," I exclaimed, struggling to keep the bile in my throat from rising anymore. In the span of 5 minutes, I'd almost been killed by a vampire, met a guy whose age I couldn't see, seen a puppet show, and watched a corpse melt. "Don't worry, newbie, she'll come back, they always do," he said. I didn't know how to respond to that. "She'll rise again at the spot where she first died and became a vampire," Nate stated matter-of-factly. "Great," I replied, rolling my eyes backwards, "because that clears everything up for me now. Hey, listen, man, I heard the tail end of that conversation. Seems to me we've got something in common. You live around here?" he asked nonchalantly, as if he hadn't just used the force on one of my previous bar patrons and disposed of the evidence in one fell swoop. I nodded my head behind me, gesturing to Marty's. "I sleep upstairs." Nate wiped his hand under his nose as he sniffed in a quick breath of air. "Perfect. I could use a drink." Somehow, I, Henry West, your average bartender at Marty's, found myself sitting on the edge of a king-size bed next to a very questionable stain in a seedy motel somewhere in backwoods Maine. Don't ask me how I got here, because I'm not so sure myself. There's a good chance, however, my journey began after sharing a drink with Nate. Now, normally I don't condone serving alcohol to minors, but the guy did kind of save my ass from becoming vampire fodder, so it was the least I could do. After a few shots of bourbon and a long conversation, I learned some things. First, Nate's full name was Nathaniel Beckett Wallen, and he was 19 years old. He's been kicking vampire ass for 3 years. Turns out, me and the kid actually have a lot in common. We both had near-death experiences for one. Mine wasn't nearly as bad as his, though. Nathaniel became orphaned when he was 16 after he and his family got into a bad car wreck. Their car had been T-boned by a semi-truck. The driver had fallen asleep at the wheel and lost control of the vehicle. At first they thought everyone in the car had passed away, but by some miracle Nate survived, but barely. I got to see the car on his right arm from when they had to do reconstructive surgery on it after the accident. I'm not sure there were more, but I don't think he felt comfortable showing them to me. We were still practically strangers to one another. Nate had also dreamt about the woman in the garden, just like I did. He was able to elaborate more for me, though. The garden had a name, the Garden of Mara. Mara was the lady in the garden, Nate informed me. She was a goddess, and not just any goddess. She was the goddess of life. She also represents light and good, and apparently when someone dies, their soul gets to rest peacefully in the garden. More importantly, Nate was able to remember their conversation. He didn't really tell me what exactly was said, but what he did tell me was that they talked. She hugged him and sent him back after kissing him on the forehead. After that, he had the ability to control vampires. Just like how, after I almost died, I woke up being able to see people's ages. Mara's chosen few. That's what Nate called us. Now it made sense why Harley called me a chosen earlier. He told me we were handpicked by Mara and given our own unique abilities to stop an immensely evil force. her brother. Wesson, the god of death, was Mara's complete opposite. Who knew death had such a dorky name, by the way? Basically, he stands for evil and darkness. Before her was him, all alone in the darkness. Mara brought light into his world and gave him a friend. The two were inseparable at first. She was the yang to his yin. Mara even created the garden as their little spot where they could hang together. Then, after a while, she got bored and created life. Apparently, he got jealous of her creations since she started spending more of her energy on them than on her own brother. He then tried to gain her attention back by destroying the life she had created. Yeah, Wesson sent the meteor that killed all the dinosaurs. Understandably upset, Mara banished Wesson from her garden. Then she created humans in the aftermath of the dinosaurs' extinction and made him live on Earth amongst her new creations. To rub more salt into the wound, Wesson, being the god of death, has to bring human souls back to the garden when they die. Every time he asked Mara to be let back in, and every time she denied him. Wesson eventually became fed up and bitter, so he created vampires out of some of the souls that he collected. Their sole purpose was to torment, drain, and kill other humans. His creatures have the primal desire to hurt his dear sister's creations and suck their life force out of them. The goal, just like the dinosaurs, is to wipe out the entire human race, just to see his sister suffer. In an effort to combat his ploy to destroy the world, Mara selected 3 of her finest humans and turned them into warriors who were meant to fight off the vampire infestation. They were given immunity to vampire bites and had abilities that could stop the bloodsuckers. But since controlling how a person dies wasn't within their territory, Mara couldn't protect her soldiers from death completely. That's why there was such an age gap between me and Nate. There had been others before us, and if they died, then another is chosen to take their place. Finally, Nate revealed the true purpose of our powers. There was one of the chosen who could see the true age of a vampire. They were to alert the one who could control vampires long enough to keep them still, so that the last chosen one could light their asses on fire and kill them for good, since only light can destroy the darkness. And what better source of light than fire? We were destined to be a tag team of sorts. How do you know all this? Is this what Mara told you? I had asked Nate after he finished giving me the basic rundown of our situation. I scratched my chin, confused on why in the 17 years that I had gotten my ability, I hadn't known about any of this. Wouldn't it have made sense for vampires to want to track me down, seeing as I could literally blow their cover? Then again, Harley was none the wiser when she came into the bar, so maybe we smelled like regular schmegular humans to them. More or less was all he told me. So if there's supposed to be 3 of us, then... That's what I was going to ask you, Henry, he said. I've been on a mission to eradicate the vampire race for years now, and I finally have a solid new lead on where the chosen with the fire ability is. With your ability to pinpoint vamps and my ability to control them, we'll be able to do a lot of good in this world. We'll be unstoppable once all 3 of Mara's chosen few are united. So, are you with me? He said. Wait, does that mean you were looking for me? Have you been looking for me all this time? I asked frantically. The once dwindling flame of purpose inside me was now a roaring blaze. Had I finally found my people, my purpose? Nate shrugged his shoulders playfully. Again, more or less. Well then, Nate, I stuck my hand out to shake his. We're on a mission. The loud sound of a rumbling muffler pulling into the Holes parking lot broke me out of my daydream. A second later, Nate opened up the door to our room. Get ready, he said as a brown ball of clothes was thrown on me. After changing into the light brown khaki costume Nate had given me, I slung the small backpack that carried all the belongings I'd taken from Marty's with me over my shoulder. I then stopped and peeked out the open door and took a look at the rust bucket that Nate had pulled up in. Do we really have to go out in that rolling death trap? I said, pointing to the white kidnapper-looking van in the parking lot. Isn't that hunk of junk going to give our position away? Precisely the opposite, young blood. The hunk of junk is exactly what they're expecting, Nate said, patting my shoulder as I exited the musty-smelling motel. Can you stop talking to me like that? I'm older than you, Nate. Like a lot older, I grunted out, annoyed. Nate scoffed. Yeah, but I have more experience than you do, he said. Well, he did get me there. Weren't you ever taught to respect your elders? I grumbled under my breath. Yeah, okay, whatever then, Grandpa, Nate replied back jokingly. I ran out of clever and witty retorts to say as we piled into the van. Giant baby blue words saying devilishly fast delivery were plastered on either side of the windowless van with little devil horns and a tail accompanying the logo. The clothes Nate tossed at me earlier was a Party City delivery driver Halloween costume that he bought. It rode up my crotch uncomfortably as I settled into the passenger seat. He'd gotten me a size too small. We wear the same size, but he said they only had one in our size left. Since he bought the costumes and pretty much set everything up, I got stuck with a smaller one. A thick folded blue paper landed in my lap, aiding the uncomfortable sensation in my nether regions. I folded it open. It revealed the layout of a large multi-floor structure. That's the blueprints for the facility. Look it over, memorize it, become one with it. Don't make me have to come save your ass while we're in there, Nate said seriously as he peeled out of the parking lot. We had about an hour drive ahead of us until we got to Marvelous Maddie's mental health institution. That's where the chosen with the fire ability was being kept. Nate says her name is Emily Richardson. All he was able to find out was that she'd been locked up in that mental hospital for 4 years. Nate looked at me nervously. Let's go over the plan again one more time, he said. I nodded politely. Clearly Nate was used to working alone. We're posing as delivery drivers making routine medical supply drop-off. Once we get inside the facility, our main goal is to find and save Emily. Nate points to an area on the blueprints that has been circled in red marker. We'll most likely find her here in the activities room. My intel shows this is where she spends most of her time, he said. Well then why take the gamble when this might not even be who we're looking for? I asked as I skimmed over the rest of the blueprints. Well, according to my lead, it seems the place is heavily guarded and monitored, mostly at night. The security on the outside seems to be a bit more lax during the day. It also appears that Emily is the only patient in the facility. If that doesn't scream shady vampires, I don't know what does, he said. Yeah, that is weird, I replied. Why would such a big facility only have one patient? Nate answered, they don't want anyone knowing whatever the hell is they're doing in there. And by the looks of it, the activities room is in the center of the mental hospital. So we'll have to be extra careful. The room is probably the most guarded. So what is your lead for all of this? I asked after a while, trying to make small talk. An old employee that used to work here. He's human and worked on the day shift. I found his post on an internet forum by chance where he detailed his weird experiences while working here. He said there were only a few people on staff during the day that would take care of one single patient. They kept it dark inside the hospital, there were creepy guards stationed everywhere, and every once in a while some of his coworkers would go missing. He managed to escape after he saw his friend get dragged away by a creature with very sharp teeth, he said. A vampire, I whispered under my breath. Nate drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. That's what I'm hoping for. If there's vampires swarming the place, then we know we hit the jackpot, he said. I don't get it, I said as I cupped a hand behind my head. If you can control the vampires and get rid of them for a while, then what exactly do you need me for? Sure, I can see their ages and everything, but you've made it this long without me. I don't think I'll be able to help you all that much, I said. Nate sighed disappointedly. Henry, I can't do this without you. Your ability, it's more useful than you know, he said. Really? I asked, not quite believing him. I mean, the kid has 3 years of vampire hunting experience under his belt, and I only just found out the truth about my ability yesterday. Yes, really, he chuckled. Did you know that the older the vampire, the more powerful they become? I messed with a hangnail on my finger absent-mindedly. No, I don't really know much about them other than what I've seen from movies and stuff. Well, most lore in the media is wrong, I'll tell you that right now, he said. My mind flashed back to Harley's body melting into the ground in a dark goo. A shiver crept up my spine at the memory. Clearly, I said. Anyway, Henry, my point is that if we get in there and the place is crawling with vamps, your job is to direct me to the oldest ones so I can get rid of them. They're the ones we need to be on the lookout for. If you want to make it out alive, you'll do what I say, okay? I nodded my head in understanding. Look for the oldest ones. Yup, got it. Nate reached behind him suddenly, causing him to swerve in the road a little bit. A second later, there's a wooden stick in his hand that had been sharpened at the end. He handed it to me. "Is this a wooden stake?" I asked incredulously. He shrugged his shoulders. I said most of the lore was incorrect, but not all of it. One hit to the heart with one of these puppies and it'll explode into dust. "Thanks," I said. "What? You didn't think I'd send you in there alone without protection, did you?" he said. I didn't say anything as I looked my new weapon over and inspecting it. It was a simple weapon, really. It wasn't too heavy, and I had a good grip on it with my hands. It was the thought of actually destroying one of these monsters that made me uneasy. I'd never done it before. Harley was going to leave me in that alley, but Nathan was the one that sent her back to her death spot or whatever. Either way, I was in no serious danger then. Nate noticed my look of unease. "Hey," he said, "we're going to be fine, okay? We're going to rescue Emily and get out of there unscathed. We're the chosen few, remember?" Yeah, I said, feeling a little more confident myself. We're the chosen few. Nate turned down a dirt road that we rode for about 3 miles before the trees on the left side of the road cleared up, revealing a large meadow with a magnificently built mansion right in the middle. It was Greco-Roman style and reminded me of the White House. The whole property was surrounded by 6-foot-high metal fencing with barbed wire on top. We passed a big sign that read Marvelous Maddie's Mental Health Institution in big yellow letters. There was a smiley face graphic on the upper right corner that also looked like a sun. The van slowly skidded to a stop as we reached the gated entrance. There were 2 guards stationed out front on either end of the gate. They held rifles in their hands. They were just regular humans from what I could tell. One guard was 27 years old and the other was 38, respectively. "Don't say anything, act normal," Nate instructed as he started to roll down the driver's side window. "State your business," Guard 1 demanded. Nate leaned down the side of the vehicle to hand the man a card. I have no idea what it said on it. Nonchalantly, he went, "Just here for a routine delivery, sir." The guard looked at the card and scoffed before flicking it to the ground. "You're late." "Got stuck in traffic, sir. You know how it can be sometimes." Nate had a small smile on his lips. If he was nervous, he didn't look like it. A tense moment of silence passed before Guard 1 nodded to Guard 2. Guard 2 then pulled out some sort of scanning device. "All right then," Guard 1 said as he took a step back. "We're just going to scan your load to confirm." Whoa, what? As far as I knew, the back of this van was empty and had no boxes. I thought Nate went to go pick it up because he rented it from somebody, not an actual delivery service. Nate shot me a testing glance as he noticed the panicked look in my eye. He shot me a look that said, "Don't say or do anything stupid." I tried to refocus my nervous energy and redirected it towards my hands. I clutched the armrests until my knuckles went white, preparing to be shot to death. A chime sound rang out and Guard 2 walked back into position. His scanner thing was glowing green at the end. Guard 1 slapped the side of the truck twice before saying, "Okay, you're good to go." Guard 2 pressed a button and the gates slid open for the delivery van to drive through. Relief flooded my body as Nate drove down an even windier road to the mental hospital. "Like I told you, Henry," Nate chuckled. "This is exactly what they were expecting." A sudden pit formed in my stomach. I didn't like the implications that were behind that statement. It was then that I realized that Nate could be one scary hell of a dude. 2 orderlies waited for us inside the delivery bay when we pulled up. One was a guy and the other a girl. They both wore white scrubs. I quickly slipped my wooden stake on the inside of my khaki jumpsuit when I got a look at their ages. "The guy on your left is a vampire. He's 150, I whispered to Nate as we got out of the vehicle. He gave me a curt nod to let me know he heard me. "Well," he stated as he opened the back of the van up, revealing several boxes of medical supplies. "It's been a long drive for the both of us. Mind showing me the way to the bathroom?" The girl nodded her head politely as she pointed down a nearby corridor. "The restrooms are down that hall. Should be the last door on the left," she said. Nate and I thanked the woman as we briskly made our way deeper into the facility. "Why didn't you dust that vamp?" I asked. "Because he wasn't alone. The woman was there," he answered. "Well, what if he kills her?" I said. "He won't," Nate reassured me. "Not if he doesn't want to bring in all those boxes by himself." I nodded and we continued our way past the bathroom and into the activities room. The hospital itself was pretty barren. It was eerily quiet except for the buzzing of the luminescent lights installed in the ceiling. That only added to the creepy ambience. Nate's lead wasn't lying about them keeping it dark in there. As we got closer to the middle of the building, lights became sparse and every window we passed was covered with thick blackout curtains. We were definitely in the right place. Every now and then we would encounter a stray bloodsucker or two. I would yell the age of the vampire I saw and then point. Nate would do his thing and the vampire would melt into the ground, being sent back to the spot they died and became a vampire. If I remember the blueprints correctly, we should have been down the hall from the activities room. Nate stopped me suddenly though, his hand pushing my chest back. "Something doesn't feel right," he told me. "What do you mean?" I said. "This all feels too easy. We've only come across a couple of vamps and our prize is right down the hall behind a single door," he said. "You're right," I confirmed as a pit started to form in my stomach. This didn't seem right at all. Not if they were guarding the one person that could actually kill a vampire once and for all. "Get in the activities room and check on Emily," Nate said as he placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm gonna go check things out," he said. Before I could protest the split up and go along with him, Nate was already halfway back to the corridor entrance we had just come from. I grabbed the stake I had safely tucked away and armed myself with it as I cautiously made my way closer to the closed doors that should lead to the activities room. All I had to do was walk around the corner and I'd be there. With each step I took, the more this feeling of dread consumed me though. Something bad was going to happen and Nate wouldn't be there to save me. I was about 10 paces away from my destination when, out of nowhere, this older gentleman with salt and peppered hair stepped out from the corner. He looked like a butler as he had a handlebar mustache and was wearing a tall tailcoat suit and a pair of white pristine gloves on his hands. I took a step back as I saw his age. My eyes went wide as I read the number 750. That meant this guy had to have been alive during the goddamn Crusades. "There you are," he smiled menacingly, fangs out and everything. "We've been expecting you," he said, stunned. I launched towards the vampire, my stake at the ready, directing my aim towards his heart. I went in for the kill but was suddenly thrown back by the man's immense strength. I crashed into a wall where I'm pretty sure I cracked a rib or 3. He was 10 times stronger than Harley was in the alley. I tried to pick myself up to continue to fight, but the 750-year-old vampire was faster and threw me back onto the ground. I reached for my wooden stake, but he stomped on it and crushed it to pieces. He stomped on my hand too, for good measure. He looked down at me with this fake look of pity on his face. "I've always despised you chosen few. You always did fuck with my fun," he snarled in my ear. His hand was firm on my shoulder, keeping me on the ground. "It'll be fun to watch you die," he said. "You can't bite me," I strained out painfully. He chuckled. "Oh, need not to worry, young chosen one. I've got just the remedy for that little problem." Gramps reached behind his tailcoat and pulled something out. A metallic click filled my ears as he cocked a revolver. My stomach did a backflip. Another sinister smile filled his face. "Now say goodnight," he said. I clutched my eyes closed and prepared for the end. Where was Nate when I needed him? Why'd I have to get stuck with a lame power to see people's ages? All it did in the end was let me know I was going to die by the hands of a very old, very powerful vampire. I was useless. My entire existence was useless. This was it. This was the bitter end. Me cowering on the floor as a vampire laughed maniacally as he ready to shoot me to death. "No, this is not the end," a voice not my own screamed in my mind. Suddenly, an intense electrical feeling coiled through my spine. My body went rigid, then into overdrive, and I managed to stand up. This intense feeling flooded my veins. It was a mixture of energy, anger, and power. A feeling I'd never felt before. It was almost intoxicating. He tried to come at me again, but another jolt of electricity shot through me and the old vampire was stuck in place. I looked down at my hand, out in front of me, like I was using the Force. "No," he said in disbelief. He tried to make a run for it, but was unable to move from the spot I'd glued him in. Instinctively, I flicked my wrist. With a sickening crunch, every bone in the man's body shattered into a million pieces. His deformed body skin shell fell to the well-polished linoleum floors. It's like right as he hit the floor, he started turning to black smoky goo. I barely had time to process what had just happened before I was alerted to another's presence. What the? Another vampire said as he peeked around the same corner this vampire had come from. He looked much younger than the other vampire with long blonde hair and blue eyes. He gave off surfer dude vampire vibes. My hand flexed out again suddenly, directed at the 400-year-old vampire who just witnessed me kill one of his kind. "Boss, is everything all right?" I heard another vamp say from further down the hall. The vampire in front of me stared at me with scared, wide eyes. "Everything's fine," I whispered, a hastily formed idea filling my mind. "Go back to your post." "Everything's fine," he said back, repeating to me. "Go back to your post." "If you say so, boss," the other vampire said as the sound of his retreating footfalls filled the hallway. "This is not the one you are looking for," as I waved my hand in front of the vampire's face. He blinked lazily before walking back to where he came from. I stood there for a second, my brain trying to wrap itself around everything that had just happened in the past 3 minutes. The scorched spot left to the 750-year-old vampire I just killed was something for sure. But more importantly, if Nate was the only chosen one who could control the vampires, then what in the hell did I just do?